Imagine a battlefield where the fate of nations was decided in a single day. On September 19th, 1799, near Alkmaar in North Holland, one of the most strategic battles of the Second Coalition War unfolded. On one side stood the powerful alliance between Russia and Great Britain. On the other, the troops of the First French Republic and the Batavian Republic. But how did the French and their allies manage to defeat such a formidable force? Prepare yourself to discover the answer. The Battle of Bergen marked a turning point in the Second Coalition War, a conflict that engulfed Europe's greatest powers in the late 18th century. North Holland became the stage for a strategic dispute between the revolutionary French forces and the monarchical coalitions. The French victory not only consolidated Napoleon's power in the region, but also changed the course of the war itself. But what really happened on that fateful day? Who were the heroes and villains of this remarkable story? The year 1799 saw Europe in flames. The French Revolution had transformed the continent, creating new alliances and bitter enemies. When Russian and British troops landed on Dutch shores, they believed their superior numbers would guarantee victory. They couldn't have been more wrong. Through brilliant strategy, psychological warfare, and exceptional leadership, the French and Batavian forces would secure a victory that would echo through history. If you love history and want to unravel the mysteries of the great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Modern Age Chronicles channel and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we dive deep into this fascinating chapter of European history, where courage, strategy, and sometimes luck determined the fate of entire nations. In 1799, Europe was literally ablaze with conflict. The French Revolution had utterly transformed the continent, reshaping borders, toppling monarchies, and igniting new ideologies that threatened the very foundations of traditional power. The old monarchical powers, terrified by what they witnessed in France, were determined to extinguish this revolutionary flame before it spread further. Russia and Great Britain, the dominant powers of the age, found themselves unlikely allies united by a common fear: French expansion. These traditional rivals set aside their differences to form the Second Coalition, a desperate attempt to contain the revolutionary fervor that was sweeping across Europe like wildfire. North Holland, controlled by the Batavian Republic, a close French ally, became the chessboard where this grand power struggle would play out. Why North Holland? This wasn't just any territory. Its strategic location offered control of vital shipping lanes, access to the North Sea, and a potential gateway into the heart of Europe. Whoever controlled this region could dictate terms to continental trade and project military power across northern Europe. The audacious landing of Russian and British troops along the Dutch coast in August 1799 was more than just another military maneuver. It was a calculated gamble to sever the French supply lines, isolate their northern forces, and potentially trigger a counter-revolutionary uprising among the Dutch population. The coalition forces believed that many Dutch citizens secretly yearned for the return of the House of Orange and would welcome their liberators with open arms. But the French and their Batavian allies were not about to surrender their hard-won gains. General Brune, commanding the French forces, was a seasoned veteran of revolutionary warfare. He understood what was at stake, not just territory, but the very ideals of the revolution itself. Here's something fascinating that most history books don't mention. During the battle, the French employed an innovative form of psychological warfare that proved remarkably effective. French agents infiltrated local villages, spreading carefully crafted rumors about massive French reinforcements marching from the south. They exaggerated their numbers, claiming that 20,000 additional troops would arrive within hours. Some agents even posed as deserters, feeding false information to British and Russian officers about French battle plans. This web of deception sowed confusion and doubt in the coalition ranks, undermining their confidence at critical moments during the battle. When the Russian troops heard drums in the distance, their minds immediately jumped to the phantom reinforcements they'd been warned about, leading to hesitation that cost them dearly on the battlefield. This psychological dimension of warfare shows how the French were pioneering modern military tactics that went beyond mere force of arms. They understood that battles could be won in the minds of the enemy before a single shot was fired. This innovative approach would become a hallmark of Napoleonic warfare in the years to come, reshaping military strategy for generations. Leading the French forces was General Guillaume-Marie-Anne Brune, a commander whose military genius was matched only by his revolutionary fervor. Born to humble beginnings as the son of a lawyer, Brune had risen through the ranks not through aristocratic connections, but through sheer talent and dedication to the revolutionary cause. By 1799, he had already distinguished himself in numerous campaigns across Europe. What made Brune such a formidable commander was his unconventional approach to warfare. Unlike many generals of his time who relied on rigid formations and textbook tactics, Brune was a master of adaptation. He would study the terrain meticulously, assess the enemy's weaknesses, and strike where least expected. His soldiers admired him not just for his strategic mind, but for his willingness to share in their hardships. It wasn't uncommon to find Brune sleeping alongside his men or eating the same rations, earning him a loyalty that went beyond military discipline. Opposing him was the Duke of York, Frederick Augustus, son of King George III of Great Britain. Leading the combined British and Russian forces, the Duke was no stranger to command. He had spent years reforming the British Army, improving training and conditions for common soldiers. Yet for all his experience, the Duke would face challenges in Bergen that tested the limits of his abilities. Though born to privilege and power, the Duke of York had a genuine passion for military matters. He was known for his personal courage, often exposing himself to danger on the battlefield. However, his weakness lay in coordination. Managing the complex alliance between British and Russian troops proved far more difficult than commanding a purely British force. Cultural differences, language barriers, and competing objectives created friction that would prove costly during the battle. A name often overlooked in many historical accounts is Herman Daendels, the Batavian general whose contribution was crucial to the outcome. Daendels was a fascinating figure, a former lawyer turned revolutionary. He had fled the Netherlands years earlier when his pro-French political activities made him a target for authorities. Now returned as a military leader, he brought intimate knowledge of the Dutch landscape and people. Daendels understood something that his allies and enemies often missed: the unique challenges of fighting in North Holland. This wasn't just any battlefield. It was a landscape of dikes, canals, and reclaimed land, where conventional military wisdom often failed. Daendels knew which paths could support artillery, which fields would flood at high tide, and which villages harbored sympathetic citizens. This local knowledge proved invaluable as the battle unfolded. Between these three men, Brune, the Duke of York, and Daendels, hung the fate of North Holland, and perhaps the wider war. Their decisions, their strengths, and their flaws would shape the coming battle in ways none of them could fully anticipate. A little-known fact: during the campaign, Brune and Daendels initially clashed over strategy. Daendels advocated for flooding large portions of the countryside to impede the British and Russian advance, a traditional Dutch defensive tactic. Brune, concerned about civilian impact and potential backlash, initially resisted. Their heated debate reportedly lasted through an entire night, with maps and plans scattered across a farmhouse table. By dawn, they had forged a compromise, targeted limited flooding that would channel enemy forces into prepared defensive positions. This hard-won unity of purpose between the French and Batavian leadership stood in stark contrast to the strained relations between the British and Russian commanders, who often issued contradictory orders to their respective troops. Dawn broke on September 19, 1799, with a thin mist hanging over the fields near Bergen and Alkmaar. This wasn't just any morning. It was the day that would decide the fate of North Holland and potentially reshape the course of the Second Coalition War. The Russian and British forces awoke confident, perhaps overly so. Their numbers appeared formidable, approximately 25,000 troops against the French and Batavian force of roughly 20,000. The Duke of York had divided his army into 4 columns, each assigned to attack different sectors of the French and Batavian lines. On paper, it was a sound strategy. In practice, it would soon unravel in the face of the unique Dutch landscape and French ingenuity. As the coalition forces began their advance, they immediately encountered the first of many challenges. The terrain was a nightmare for conventional military movements, a maze of narrow dikes, water-filled ditches, and soft, boggy ground that swallowed men and equipment alike. British and Russian soldiers found themselves channeled into narrow passages where their superior numbers became a hindrance rather than an advantage. The Russian forces, led by General Herman, struck first at the village of Bergen itself. Initially, they made impressive progress, pushing back the French defenders and capturing the village by mid-morning. For a brief moment, it seemed the coalition might achieve a swift victory. But Brune and Daendels had anticipated this move. Rather than committing their reserves to an immediate counterattack, they allowed the Russians to extend their lines, growing more confident with each passing hour. Meanwhile, Batavian engineers had been quietly manipulating the local sluice gates, the complex system of water control that the Dutch had perfected over centuries. As the battle raged around Bergen, certain lowlands began to slowly flood, cutting off Russian supply lines and escape routes. By midday, the battle had reached its crescendo. The British forces under General Abercrombie were making slow progress against the Batavian troops near Alkmaar, hampered by carefully placed sharpshooters hidden in farmhouses and behind dikes. The Russians, meanwhile, found themselves increasingly isolated as French reinforcements arrived to contest Bergen. One of the most dramatic moments came around 2 in the afternoon. A French cavalry unit, which had been hidden in a small forest east of Bergen, suddenly emerged to strike the Russian flank. The timing was perfect, just as the Russian troops were beginning to tire and their ammunition was running low. The psychological impact was devastating. Already unsettled by rumors of massive French reinforcements, many Russian soldiers broke ranks and fled. The fighting was brutal and intimate. In the narrow confines between dikes, men fought with bayonets, sabers, and sometimes bare hands. A British officer later wrote in his diary, "Never have I witnessed such ferocity in battle." The French fought not as men following orders, but as men defending their very ideology. As evening approached, the coalition forces found themselves in disarray. Communication between the British and Russian contingents had broken down almost entirely. The Duke of York, receiving conflicting reports from the field, struggled to form a coherent picture of the battle. By contrast, Brune and Daendels maintained a unified command, adapting their strategy as the situation evolved. By nightfall, the verdict was clear. The coalition forces had been repulsed, suffering nearly 2,000 casualties compared to the French and Batavian losses of around 1,300. The Russians had been driven from Bergen. The British pushed back from their positions near Alkmaar, a fascinating detail often overlooked. During the battle, French officers used a network of church towers to signal troop movements using a modified version of the newly developed semaphore system. This allowed them to coordinate their forces with unprecedented speed, responding to threats almost as soon as they emerged. Meanwhile, British and Russian commanders relied on messengers on horseback, who often got lost in the unfamiliar terrain or were intercepted by enemy patrols. So what do you think? Which military tactic was most impressive? The French and Batavian use of controlled flooding, their lightning-fast communication system, or their brilliant psychological warfare? If you're enjoying this deep dive into military history, Make sure to like this video, share it with fellow history enthusiasts, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles for more incredible stories from the past. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to know which aspect of this battle you found most fascinating. The French victory at Bergen reverberated far beyond the smoke-filled fields of North Holland. In the immediate aftermath, as the wounded were carried from the battlefield and commanders assessed their losses, few could have predicted just how significant this single day of fighting would prove for European history. For France, the triumph at Bergen was nothing short of transformative. Not only did it secure their control of North Holland, a strategic prize of immense value, but it also injected new confidence into the revolutionary cause. Back in Paris, news of the victory was celebrated with public festivities. The Directory, France's governing body at the time, desperately needed this win to shore up popular support amid internal political turmoil. In the taverns and salons of Paris, citizens raised glasses to toast General Brune and the brave soldiers who had defeated the coalition forces. What many didn't realize was that a young general named Napoleon Bonaparte was watching these events closely, taking notes on Brune's tactics for future reference. For General Brune himself, Bergen marked a turning point in his career. His masterful handling of the battle caught Napoleon's attention, and when Bonaparte seized power in November of that same year, he remembered Brune's competence. Within months, Brune was elevated to Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors in the land. A fascinating detail often overlooked by historians, Brune had actually been a printer and journalist before the Revolution, with no formal military training. His rise from civilian intellectual to battlefield commander exemplified the new meritocracy that the revolution had established, where talent mattered more than noble birth. For the British and Russians, the defeat at Bergen was a bitter pill to swallow. The Duke of York, returning to London, faced harsh criticism in Parliament and the press. Political cartoonists had a field day, depicting him fleeing from French soldiers with his coattails between his legs. While somewhat unfair, the Duke had shown personal courage throughout the campaign. These images damaged his reputation. More seriously, the British government was forced to recognize that landing forces in continental Europe was not enough. They needed a more comprehensive strategy to defeat France. The Russian Tsar Paul I took the defeat particularly hard. He had committed his elite troops to this campaign, expecting a swift victory that would demonstrate Russian military might to the world. Instead, Bergen became a symbol of Russian humiliation. Within months, disillusioned with his British allies and frustrated by the campaign's failure, Paul began to drift away from the coalition. This shift would eventually lead to his brief and bizarre admiration for Napoleon, a diplomatic somersault that shocked European courts. The human cost of Bergen cannot be overlooked. Nearly 3,000 men lost their lives that day, with thousands more wounded. Many of the injured faced gruesome amputations performed without anesthesia in field hospitals, where disease often proved more deadly than the initial wounds. Villages around Bergen found themselves transformed into makeshift hospitals, with local families taking wounded soldiers into their homes regardless of which side they had fought for. A touching display of humanity amid the brutality of war. Perhaps the most profound consequence of Bergen was its impact on the wider Second Coalition War. The victory emboldened France to push forward with renewed vigor on multiple fronts. It demonstrated that despite the combined might of Europe's traditional powers, revolutionary France remained unbowed. For monarchs watching nervously across Europe, Bergen confirmed their worst fears. The revolutionary spirit was not just resilient, it was winning. A little-known fact: following the battle, French soldiers discovered a cache of personal letters from Russian troops, which they collected and, remarkably, attempted to return to Russia through diplomatic channels as a gesture of respect for the fallen. This unusual act of humanity in warfare speaks to the complex nature of this period, where bitter ideological enemies could still recognize each other's basic dignity. The battle also had unexpected consequences for Dutch civilians. The Batavian Republic, established as a French satellite state, gained credibility through this victory. Many Dutch citizens who had been skeptical of the new republic began to see it as a legitimate defender of Dutch interests, rather than simply a French puppet. Local folklore in Bergen still tells of farmers who helped guide French troops through hidden paths or warned of enemy movements, choosing sides in what was becoming as much an ideological struggle as a territorial one. The triumph at Bergen bought valuable time for the revolutionary movement, allowing it to consolidate power at a crucial moment. Within 2 months, Napoleon would seize control in France, setting the stage for the Napoleonic era that would reshape Europe for the next 15 years. In this light, Bergen wasn't just another battle. It was a pivotal moment that helped enable the rise of one of history's most transformative figures. Behind the cannons, bayonets, and battlefield strategies of Bergen lay a complex web of human relationships and political intrigues that shaped the battle's outcome as surely as any military tactic. History books often focus on the clash of armies, but the hidden dynamics between commanders, politicians, and ordinary citizens created the true backdrop against which this drama unfolded. The coalition forces, impressive on paper, were undermined by deep-seated tensions between their leaders. The Duke of York and Russian General Herman maintained a relationship that was polite in public but fraught in private. During war councils, in the days before the battle, witnesses described heated arguments that sometimes continued late into the night. A British officer's diary, discovered decades later, revealed that during one particularly tense meeting, the Duke of York exclaimed in frustration, "The Russians seem more interested in claiming glory than achieving victory." Meanwhile, General Herman complained to his staff that the British were arrogant islanders who understand nothing of continental warfare. These weren't merely personal disagreements. They reflected fundamental strategic divisions. The British favored a cautious approach, securing territory methodically before advancing. The Russians, eager to demonstrate their military prowess to Europe, pushed for aggressive, direct attacks. When the battle began, these contradictory approaches manifested in poorly coordinated movements and conflicting orders that left troops confused and vulnerable. Language barriers compounded these problems. Few British officers spoke Russian, and vice versa. Translators were in short supply, and crucial orders often passed through 3 or 4 intermediaries before reaching frontline troops, sometimes arriving too late or distorted beyond recognition. One Russian unit reportedly charged a position that the British had already abandoned because the order to halt came 20 minutes too late, lost in translation. In stark contrast, the French and Batavian forces operated with remarkable cohesion. Though they too came from different cultures, they shared a revolutionary ideology that transcended national boundaries. General Brune and Herman Daendels had developed not just a working relationship, but a genuine friendship, forged through shared hardships and political sympathies. They often dined together, discussing strategy over local Dutch gin and French wine. This personal connection allowed them to speak frankly, reconcile differences quickly, and present a unified front to their troops. A fascinating backstage detail: Brune had actually learned Dutch in the years before the battle, allowing him to communicate directly with Batavian officers and even local civilians. This linguistic bridge proved invaluable during the battle, when quick decisions needed to be made without the delay of translation. It also earned him the respect of the Dutch troops, who saw his effort to learn their language as a sign of genuine respect. The role of intelligence and espionage in the Battle of Bergen remains one of its most intriguing aspects. Both sides employed networks of spies and informants throughout North Holland. Local farmers, tavern keepers, and fishermen were recruited to report on enemy movements. The French and Batavians held a distinct advantage here. Many Dutch civilians, especially those sympathetic to revolutionary ideas, willingly shared information about British and Russian troop movements. Some even acted as guides, leading French patrols through hidden paths known only to locals. Perhaps the most overlooked participants in this historical drama were the ordinary citizens of North Holland. For them, the battle wasn't about grand ideologies or strategic objectives. It was a catastrophe that descended upon their homes and fields. Farmers saw crops trampled by marching armies. Villagers had their houses commandeered for use as command posts or field hospitals, and food stores were requisitioned by hungry troops from both sides. In the village of Bergen itself, church records tell a heartbreaking story. In the weeks following the battle, the local pastor documented dozens of civilian deaths, not just from stray bullets or cannon fire, but from disease brought by the armies and starvation as winter approached with food supplies depleted. One particularly moving entry describes an elderly couple who starved to death after soldiers took their winter provisions, leaving them with nothing as the cold months approached. Yet amidst this suffering, remarkable acts of humanity emerged. Some Dutch families hid wounded soldiers from both sides, tending to their injuries regardless of uniform. A French surgeon named Jean-Baptiste Larrey, who would later become famous as Napoleon's chief medical officer, worked for 3 days without sleep, treating British and Russian wounded alongside French and Dutch casualties. When questioned about this, he reportedly said, "When men are wounded, they are no longer enemies." Local women played a crucial but unsung role, organizing impromptu hospitals in churches and barns, tearing their own linens for bandages, and cooking for the wounded. One Dutch woman, Annetje Claassen, became legendary for carrying water to wounded soldiers on both sides during the battle itself, risking her life amid flying bullets. Her small act of compassion stands as a powerful counterpoint to the grand strategies and political machinations of the powerful. These hidden threads of human connection, conflict and compassion wove themselves through the Battle of Bergen, creating a tapestry far richer and more complex than a simple military engagement. Understanding these backstage dynamics helps us see beyond the battlefield to the very human story that unfolded in North Holland in those fateful days of 1799. The Battle of Bergen stands as far more than a mere military confrontation on the fields of North Holland. It represents a pivotal moment that fundamentally shaped Europe's destiny at the dawn of the 19th century. In those fateful hours of September 19th, 1799, the course of history hung in the balance, determined by strategy, courage, weather conditions, terrain, and even simple luck. What makes Bergen so fascinating is how clearly it demonstrates that history isn't inevitable. It's shaped by human choices, both brilliant and flawed. General Brune's decision to use psychological warfare, the Duke of York's struggles with coalition management, Daendels' intimate knowledge of the Dutch landscape, these individual choices cascaded into consequences that would echo across generations. Consider this thought-provoking question. What if the outcome had been different? What if the British and Russian forces had overcome their internal divisions and emerged victorious that day? The Batavian Republic might have collapsed. Napoleon's rise could have been checked before it truly began, and the revolutionary ideals spreading across Europe might have been contained or even extinguished. Without Napoleon's subsequent conquests, would nationalism have awakened across Europe as it did? Would the map of modern Europe look anything like it does today? The ripples from this single battle extended far beyond North Holland. Bergen helped secure Napoleon's path to power, which led to sweeping legal reforms across Europe through the Napoleonic Code. It contributed to Russia's temporary withdrawal from the Second Coalition, reshaping European alliances. It even influenced military thinking, as commanders studied the French innovations in communication and psychological warfare. Perhaps most poignantly, Bergen reminds us that behind the grand strategies and national interests were thousands of individual human beings, Soldiers following orders, civilians caught in the crossfire, commanders wrestling with impossible decisions. Their stories, hopes, fears, and sacrifices are woven into the fabric of this historical moment. History is not merely a collection of dates and facts to memorize. It's a rich tapestry of human experience that continues to offer insights into our present and future. The tensions between revolution and tradition, between cooperation and division, between strategic vision and tactical reality, these themes from Bergen resonate even today in our modern world. So what about you? What do you think might have happened if the scales had tipped the other way at Bergen? How might Europe, and indeed the world, look different today? History's great what-if questions invite us not just to learn about the past, but to engage with it imaginatively, to see its relevance to our present moment. If you've enjoyed this journey into one of history's pivotal but often overlooked battles, please take a moment to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate the fascinating complexities of our shared past. Subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles to join us for more deep dives into the transformative events and compelling personalities of the modern age. From the halls of Versailles to the battlefields of Europe, from scientific breakthroughs to cultural revolutions, we're exploring the moments that made our world. And don't forget to leave a comment with your thoughts on the Battle of Bergen or suggestions for future topics you'd like us to explore. Your engagement helps shape this channel, just as individual choices shaped history at Bergen more than 2 centuries ago. Until our next historical adventure, thank you for watching.